Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's exciting webinar brought to you by the Division of Extended Education at the University of Manitoba. My name is Karen Woloschuk, and I will be your moderator for today. In just a few minutes, we'll delve into the fascinating world of artificial intelligence and lifelong learning. It's a topic that's generating quite a buzz, and we're here to explore it in depth. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. One quick note about your ability to participate in today's webinar. Please submit questions using the Q&A function, and we will keep an eye on it and incorporate your questions into our discussion as best we can and as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our panel for today. Our first panel member is Rod Lastra, Acting Dean of the Division of Extended Education here at the University of Manitoba. Rod is an experienced expert in adult and lifelong education with over 25 years experience in higher education. He holds a master's and a PhD in science, and his research background in theoretical ecology brings a unique multidisciplinary approach to his work. Rod has a keen interest in understanding the intersectionality of emerging technologies, such as AI, on lifelong education models and learning methodologies. As current president of the Canadian Association of University Continuing Education, Rod is involved in collaborative projects that help shape lifelong policies and blends research with technology to create an inclusive learning ecosystem. And next, I'd like to introduce Kelly Shiohira, Executive Manager, Research and Data Ecosystems at JET Education Services. Kelly is a distinguished strategist and researcher with a specialized focus on educational interventions in low-income environments. Her expertise spans literacy, workforce development, and the integration of AI in educational settings. She's collaborated with global organizations to launch impactful initiatives, including an award-winning Literacy Through Technology program in multiple African languages. Holding master's degrees from the University of Pennsylvania and Rhodes University, Kelly is currently focused on innovative credentialing and improved labor market signaling. She's also actively developing an AI student competency framework in collaboration with UNESCO. Her insights into the role and implications of AI in skills development have found a broad audience through her numerous published articles. And now I'd like to pass it over to Rod to start today's discussion.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you everyone for joining. I'd like to begin by actually providing a little bit of an overview in terms of what we're going to be talking about today. Today's really is a non-technical insight and conversation with Kelly about that intersectionality of artificial intelligence, learning and education. And this is part of our year-long webinar series that we are organizing. The startup is today. We have another one coming up on November 17th, where we will be digging deep into the workings of ChatGPT. We will come back in March and continue the conversation, perhaps a reflective conversation, looking at where things have come. And as many of you may or may not know, with the pending release of GPT-5 and Gemini, things are again poised to change for us. There may be in April a webinar that we're in the process of trying to finalize, and then we have a panel discussion, which I'm pleased to say that Kelly will be part of in May 2024. So to begin with, I think where we can start is by this really messy slide. And the slide really kind of depicts the nature narrative of AI at the moment. If you've been paying attention to the stories and headlines, they are all over the place. Everything from miracle and cures to dystopian worldviews about the implication of utilizing AI widely. through this sorting of information, I think it becomes very difficult, even for those of us who are in the space of education, to try to really sort out what the implications truly are. There have been efforts as of late. Oregon State just released their Bloom's taxonomy revisited, and whether that's the kind of impact this may have, I think remains to be seen. There are other efforts as well to maybe look at frameworks that could be implemented. But before we do anything, I think we need to begin to understand what it is that we're talking about. And again, I don't have a technical background, and I come to this as a non-technical specialist in this area, but I do see the need for us to kind of have an entry point to really understand what AI is. First of all, what is the implications of generative AI, and to really do that, we need to understand what that does. So let's begin with that first question. So AI is really designed to enhance human capabilities by simulating cognitive tasks that are inherently human, such as facial recognition, adaptive learning, communication, linguistics, reasoning. In fact, think of it this way. What AI is attempting to do is everything we're doing right now: consuming information, processing information, utilizing that information to recognize patterns and respond to that. Respond to that either cognitively, respond to that either through communication or through action. In other words, the very being of being a human being. So it's a big task. Now, how it works, if we look at the model, and I've tried to think about this, and I think there's a really good example here. If we look at the differences between AI and non-AI computation, it comes down to this. We have procedural methodologies which we've used in computer systems for a long time. Within the AI world, we have rule-based processes and we have machine learning processes. And let's kind of look at a very high-level example of what these differences are. So procedural-based non-AI computation is really the basic arithmetic analytical processes that you find in, let's say, a statistical piece of software, where, for example, if you're trying to figure out the final grades of students based on hours of study, you can make some determinations on the variables, and you can include the equation and come up with a really deterministic outcome on that. Now, on the AI part of the spectrum, we have rule-based, which has been around for quite some time, and it's really applying the same approach. However, the programmer in this case is trying to resolve the rules and logic to be able to answer A times B equals C. So it does it by a series of if-then statements. And the if-then statements have wide applications. The results are the same, but they are used for to really understand and make decisions. But the programmer, here's the key, must know the rules. The programmer must know the patterns in the data, right? So here's where machine learning takes place, is that the machine learns from the data, this behavior. The machine learns to kind of recognize the logic, and the machine learns to recognize those rules. So a series of really complicated algorithms. And so what it does is that essentially does what procedural does, but it does it at a grand scale. It automates the process. And the beauty about this, or the very interesting thing about this, is that it discovers the rules and logic associated with really complex problems. It discovers pattern exceeding human capability. It's self-guided, it's dynamic and autonomous. And it's used in a lot of applications. So now if we dig deep, a little bit more in terms of what this means, this architecture of machine learning is vast and complicated. It includes artificial neural networks that can do a lot of things with data. You can train loads of data to be able to look at everything from analyzing medical images to self-driving cars, molecular discoveries, climate data, etc. Now, the thing with this type of analysis is that it is able to output really complex outputs or answers, right, based on large multivariate space. And it enables decision-making. So again, much like what we were doing before, but the system is recognizing the pattern and it's recognizing associations in data that perhaps cognitively is very difficult for simple machines to do, or even for humans to do as well. Now, the data is either biological data, it's driving data, it's molecular data, it's climate data. But if the data needs to generate content, and if the data is, let's say, text-based, then that's when we get into the field of generative AI, which is really a specialized form of this complex architecture. So if the data that you're inputting is text, so you're giving it loads of text and you're trying to make it predict text or predict a way of communicating, then what you get is a large language model. If you use vast amounts of text, then you get something called a generative pre-trained transformer or a GPT model. Now, the interesting thing about the GPT model, which is very intriguing from a scientific standpoint, is it picks out nuanced regularities and structures in natural language, which is really fascinating. It's able to generate syntactically accurate and contextually relevant content, but, and here's the important but, it's completely agnostic to knowledge. In other words, it has no idea of comprehension or understanding. What it's giving you is probabilistic, inferential associations of words, which happen to underscore the very pattern of linguistics, which happen to make some sense. That's a really interesting part of this, right? Now, if you use, instead of text, images, sound, video, and other forms, then we get into something called foundation models, right? Which effectively do the exact same thing. So as of a couple of hours ago, The Economist posted this: Chat GPT mania may soon be cooling, but serious new industry is taking shape. If you look at the image on the right-hand side, you see the implications of what's already in the market. Consumer, enterprise, loads of solutions that are generative-based applications where I think we need to think about what this means for all of us. So the purpose of this conversation is really to explore this, and we're going to dig deep in having a conversation with Kelly, who's been involved in the UNESCO guidance for generative AI in education and research, and also contributed a chapter in Augmented Education and Global Age, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Learning and Work. So I am super excited and super interested to have this conversation with Kelly, and I'd like to welcome Kelly to this forum, and really begin, Kelly, by asking you kind of a startup question, kind of based on what I was just talking about a few seconds ago. This idea of intersectionality of AI and learning, based on your experience and work in educational development, what are your insights in this space?
Thanks, Rod. It's a real pleasure to be here. I do have to start off with a small correction. So the guidance for generative AI in education research was developed by Fengxun Miao, who's the head of the UNESCO unit that deals with artificial intelligence, and my colleague Wayne Holmes, who co-authored the chapter in the Augmented Education and Global Age with me. So my involvement was very minimal. I just attended a workshop and reviewed it, but I know they won't mind me speaking to it as we all work very closely together, but I just wanted to clarify. I think when we talk about the intersection of generative AI and learning, I think, look, this has been a long pathway for all of us. AI, there's no sector that's left untouched by artificial intelligence. And particularly for those of us who are focused on education skills and the links between learning and society, this has been a rapidly and fast evolving field, even all the way back to ICT for education, which is how I kind of came into this work. I started off as an absolute technology skeptic in education, and one of my professors at UPenn, Dan Wagner, got me involved in the Bridges to the Future initiative in South Africa. It was a literacy through technology program, and the research we did around that demonstrated pretty definitively that it improved outcomes for exactly the type of learners I work with: rural South African, disenfranchised, linguistic minority learners. So I invested in AI first as a potential augmentation of that. You see a lot of these programs, student supporting programs is how we would refer to them, that are just geared at improving learning outcomes. I think there are a lot of problems with that, and I quickly ran into a lot of them. just briefly, high level, maybe the first thing is that when we talk about improving learning outcomes, these are still structured against a very standardized view of education, which doesn't really incorporate what we're calling the skills of the future very well. So yes, you can use artificially intelligent program to improve learning outcomes in mathematics, for example, but it does mean an increased focus on individual learning. We call it personalized learning, but it's not really personalized. It's set along a curriculum pathway. And so it's not really developing the types of skills that, frankly, we keep saying are the most important skills for the future: collaboration, creativity, problem solving. So I think what I found is that they are very useful for the basics, because if you think about it, basic literacy, basic mathematics are a foundation for those more advanced skills I'm talking about, and it must be established, but they're not a solution in and of themselves. They won't get us to the endpoint that we want alone. And then at the same time, the other side of my work is really on interoperable data ecosystems for education, improving links between education and the labor market, and education and society more broadly. So I started engaging with AI solutions in that space as well: job placement scraping, and sort of some of the more innovative automations, if I could put it that way, around translating between qualifications framework and incorporating MOOCs and more online learning resources. So this has led to a bit of a dichotomy, if I could just put it that way, in my personal current career. I'm a strong advocate for the responsible use of AI and the context-driven use of AI, but I'm very critical of most of the applications we've encountered. I think you've mentioned it already, just to say that there are a lot of solutions out there, but a lot of them aren't ethical and they don't respond to the context very well. So I guess the final point on this is that the introduction of generative AI and Gen AI coincides with my own promotion to executive manager within JET Education Services. And so I've spent a lot of the last year grappling with what this means for JET as an organization. It's challenging our structures and operating models. It impacts teaching and learning, but it's also going to impact society more broadly and frankly, us directly, those of us on this call.
So that's interesting. So, it got me thinking, is there a duality here? And what I mean by duality is, in parts of the world where access to education is high, the concern there is that the use of these, learning assistants, these, Gen AI learning assistants, may begin to undermine kind of natural pedagogies. In other words, how an instructor or teacher engages and transfers knowledge, because ultimately that individual has no agency over how the learner is interacting with that environment, which can lead to issues. There's no oversight. It's like having a TA or someone in your classroom who's co-teaching the course, but you never talk to them. Like, you don't know what they're saying. You don't know what insights they're providing your students. On the other hand, in many places of the world where the population is increasing and where access to education becomes really scarce and yet is really important, is this an opportunity that, if done well, that this could create a solution to those gaps? Or is it not that simple?
Is it ever that simple? No, I think you're right that there absolutely is a duality. I think it comes down to the point of what I see from current AI uses in K-12 education. So I will admit that most of my work with AI is focused on K-12 and a little bit less on tertiary side, but is that it is quite good at fundamental routine skills. You will see that a majority of edtech companies are focusing on mathematics. Well, that's a no-brainer because it's straightforward. The dependencies are clear. The curriculum is well structured. You don't have to account for things like learners of second languages and kind of all the complexity that comes into other subjects, individual histories and, individual perspectives of history and things like that. You're not worried about debate or innovation or crediting people for new ideas. You know, if a kid comes and says the answer is 8 and Euclidean geometry says it's 6, well, the kid is wrong, and that's just done. You know, there's no room for negotiation. So so I do think that there is a place where learning outcomes are so poor that they're not generating that basic level of outcomes for technology to come in and support. And actually, even in more advanced, and I put that in quotation marks intentionally, societies or systems. I mean, I'll use my own children's education system here in the United States. They rely a lot on technology. They provide access to code.org, to a mathematics learning program called IXL, to several different reading programs. And these have, frankly, focused my children on doing this sort of extracurricular work, if you want to call it that way. And that's certainly a way to improve outcomes. So I don't think it's as simple as just saying, yes, we should use this in developing countries, and no, we shouldn't use this in more advanced economies that have higher GDP. But at the same time, I think that it is all about the contextual application of a solution. And I want to make a few points about this. The first point is that the narrative around AI in education at the moment is largely industry-driven. And this largely industry-driven view is a very poorly defined deficit view of education. There's a problem in education which AI can solve. Now, what that problem is very much unclear. You know, like, is the problem that teachers aren't competent? Well, we don't say that, and they don't say that. They position technology as a resource, as an addition, as something that teachers can use to save themselves time. They haven't come in to say, you know, teachers are incompetent, but yet the solutions that they're proposing really only work if a teacher is pretty incompetent. I have to be honest. So, you know, so there's a little bit of a mismatch there. There's poor definition of the problem, and then the solutions seem to mismatch the stated problem anyway, which may not be the actual problem that people have identified. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. And I think the second thing I'd like to say is just a few examples of what this means in context. So one of the major ways that AI is being used to assist teachers is through facial recognition software. So there's an argument, even from the national level at some countries, and definitely from the industry level, that AI can help teachers by determining which students are and aren't paying attention in class. So they use facial recognition software to determine whether the students are engaged, and they send feedback to the teacher on a dashboard. Now, I'm just going to take that down to a practical application. If you're in a small class of 20, I would say the teacher already knows. You know, the teacher is well aware of which kid is sleeping and which kid is staring out the window and so on and so forth. And she's taking a determination about whether to deal with that. And in a large class, say a lecturer who's got a class of 400 or however many you might have in an introductory science class or English class or whatever, you know, is the lecturer really going to monitor a dashboard while delivering the lecture to call out the student in 12E and say, hey, you're looking out the window? No, at a certain point in time, we have to rely on students and their own agency and their own investment in the learning process, you know? So practically, the solution just doesn't pan out in my mind, you know, like, but it is one of the most widely proposed.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touch upon a few things. I mean, one of the things that personally for me that I'm concerned about is not the potential of what we can use for this, because I think there is always potential, but with any potential, there has to be time to think, time to implement, to kind of think about what will happen. The ethical considerations of facial recognition in a classroom is huge. I think you and I were discussing, I went to a conference in the States where one of the vendors was trying to sell us a Zoom type platform. It wasn't Zoom. And they were able to use facial recognition to detect patterns of emotion, distress, active or passive learning. And I thought, well, you know, are learners even aware of this? And it kind of harks back to the whole argument that we had a couple of decades ago about GMOs, that again, technology is advancing before we have time to think, before we have time to thoughtfully regulate, you know, the system, and to really kind of look at the implications. So with that in mind and your involvement, as you clarified, could you maybe provide, a bit of a guidance, large high-level findings of the guidance for generative AI in education and research? Because I think this document by UNESCO is being widely circulated, and it'd be really good to get your perspectives on that.
Great. Yes, I think this is one of the earliest publications on the topic, at least as a guidance for policymakers. So I do expect that it will be widely used. And I think that's a good thing. It's a positive. I think that there are a few things that I'd like to stress. You've covered some of them already, but the first is that generative AI is a range of applications of a set of already existing algorithms or models. So it's actually new applications of old tech, if you want to put it that way. There are a huge number. They've outlined quite a few in this guidance. There's a huge number of different softwares and apps that are available using generative AI. Dozens, maybe hundreds already, and this number is only going to increase. So it's not going anywhere. It definitely is becoming widely used. The second thing is that the flags that are raised in this publication are familiar to those of us who have worked in artificial intelligence over the last 5 or 10 years. Increasing digital, economic, social divides, the slow pace of legislation, the inability of legislation and honestly education systems, they don't say that, but I will, to keep up with industry developments. We're still at a point where we're discussing data sovereignty and they're like, well, we've got your data and we're using it, it's done. So ownership and IP concerns, new iterations of familiar arguments as well. You may be familiar with the pending court cases around artist work and generative AI that can create art in the style of a given artist. How that all comes down is going to depend on the legislative systems and the legal systems catching up quite quickly. And then, the transparency and explainability of models and products is always going to be a concern because there's an interest in protecting that. And at the same time, if you really want to make sure that there isn't bias or there isn't unfair representation, you really need to be able to see under the hood a bit more than we can. I think that the new thing that's been added to the flags is this idea of the stochastic parrot syndrome, where it sounds really good, but it's a very, informative article about bears in space or, something completely unrealistic. And so that's something that we are going to have to watch out for. I think, Rod, you and I have discussed before that generative AI can be very useful if you already know the topic extremely well. If you don't, then you won't catch the errors that it is prone to. I also think that the solutions on the policy level are familiar. So invest in human-centered development, center data ownership, make adjustments to the copyright laws and national policies as you need, and develop capacity in the area. I know a lot of countries are already working on at least the first 4.
Thanks, Kelly. So, an idea that I'm going to talk more about with Ray in November when we explore Chat GPT a little bit more in depth is this whole idea of hallucination, which is a fascinating term for an algorithm to hallucinate. I mean, when we talk about AI, but really what it is, I mean, it's the power of the algorithm. The more parameters it has, the billions of parameters, the more fine-tuned it is, the more likely that it's going to be able to predict things, but it's also going to be more prone to some error. And although they are claiming that the hallucination or error sources of the information are decreasing and will decrease with the release of GTP5, it brings back that idea of expert interface, that you have the ability to utilize this instrument in very powerful ways. And I think you and I talked about when I was testing it out. I have an undergrad background in physics, so I know a little bit about the topic. So I prompted it to provide me a very simple explanation on quantum entanglement, and it did a really good job. But then on other matters, right, problem solving, it makes mistakes, and it's okay because you you ask it to autocorrect and it will do it, or you will correct the mistakes yourself. But the problem is, without that expert interface, the propagation of misinformation, the propagation of facts that are not there becomes a problem. This goes back to the idea of that agency, the pillar of natural pedagogy, which is kind of what we do in the classroom. So I'm not sure that's a question, more of a comment, but any thoughts on that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And to be honest, as engagement with the public increases, the accuracy may decrease in some areas. We've already seen that, to be honest, that these models degenerate actually over time in some areas like mathematics and so on and so forth, just because they are based on statistics, as you were saying. And so if the average tips in an incorrect direction, well, then it's more likely to generate an incorrect answer for you. So I think, yeah, I really resist, and I had this conversation recently at Digital Learning Week. I resist all of these sorts of personifications of artificial intelligence. There was a question posed at one of the workshops, how should AI be positioned in the classroom? And a lot of the answers from educationalists, as well as computer scientists, were things like, oh, it should be a co-pilot. And that's what Microsoft, I believe, has just named its new classroom-based AI, actually, is co-pilot, a thought partner, a co-teacher. And I resist that, because I think that giving AI agency is quite dangerous. And I understand, the academic tendency to want to think deeply about this and say, does it have agency? If it demonstrates, what is agency? And if it demonstrates enough of those, can we not say it has agency? But just think about it practically. Like, if we give AI agency, then what do we do when a self-driving car crashes? Who is responsible then? And the same in the classroom. If we go to this point where the teacher can say, or the admissions committee can say, well, AI determined that you won't be attending our university next fall. What does that actually mean for our society? Because we bring something to the table that AI can't bring, and that is the outside perspective, something to say, yes, okay, maybe this score wasn't technically, it was 2 points low or whatever, but actually, given these circumstances, this student is the type of person we want. And, so that's the sort of thing we need to be careful, I think, about. And we need to maintain human agency. And I think we need to hold that perspective very strongly. The person is responsible. If they use AI to aid the decision, that's fine, but it must always come back to the person.
It does, and I think it does kind of bring back. I mean, I'll be honest. I've been intrigued with the technology. I've tried it. I've tested it. Long term, I'm not convinced, and I don't use it. But full transparency, I've been trying to write a paper, and I think most of us who try to write papers, you get into that block, right? You get into that, you have ideas that you write down. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm going to use chat. I'm going to throw in my ideas, and see what it spills out. And Kelly, I have to tell you, I was impressed. But then, I was impressed when I first read it. I'm like, wow, this is great. This is a huge time saver. And then I walked away from it, and I came back a few days later, and there was a recent Washington Post article on this, and I forget the author who said this. But when I read my paper again, something jumped out at me. You know what that was?
It was boring?
No, well, not just that, but it turned out to be a really bad idea, written really well. And I thought, wait a minute. I have to go back to the drawing board, because my idea is not very sound. My logic, my arguments are not very sound. But therein lies the danger, that at first blush, I was like, wow, this is really doing something. And when I came back to it a few days later, honestly, it was garbage. I mean, it was really posing a really non-rational perspective that I had, or not finished perspective, maybe, into something that it was trying to fill in the gaps. And so it goes back to your point of agency. It goes back to the point of how do we do this? And this leads me to my next question, which is, a lot of companies out there are utilizing these Gen AI algorithms and data practices, and I know there's a question that I would like to get to soon about the data, but the practices are proprietary for a good reason, right? So Google, DeepMind and OpenAI will release only so much of the information. Apple will release only so much. The other thing too is that because it's autonomous, these systems are autonomous, even the creators of these systems are sometimes surprised by the output. So my question to you is, how important should we be placing the importance of priority on basic AI literacy in order to be able to truly start thinking about this as a co-pilot?
Yeah. So I think that's maybe less of a question and more of an assertion, like yes, we all need to talk about AI literacy. I think my own thinking on this has evolved a bit since the publication that you have on the screen there. I am a literacy specialist by training. I have a linguistics degree. So when I think about literacy has a beginning point, but not an ending point. And I think that there is a tendency, and I also kind of fell victim to this, to define literacy as the basics, like we're trying to define what is the basic package that people need to know to engage AI. I personally, I would resist calling that AI literacy now, because really all AI skills would fall under an AI literacy term. But if we talk about the basic package, for me, it's pretty straightforward. And I also think it's important to mention here that one of the emerging uses of AI is writing code. So AI development itself is becoming increasingly accessible to non-experts. So just keep that in mind also. But to me, the things that everyone must know is what AI is broadly and where they encounter it, where in their lives they encounter AI. So recommender algorithms that they might see on Netflix or YouTube or anywhere else, Amazon, like really anywhere that you shop these days. What type of data is being collected and how often. It would be ideal if people could understand the permissions that they're giving when they sign up for TikTok and whatever else. But yeah, so people should understand those broadly. And then most importantly, I think, they should understand their avenues of redress. And this has been where I think a lot of countries especially have fallen short. They do exist. But for example, like the previous example I gave about someone being excluded from university participation based on an AI algorithm. Well, what do they do? How do they challenge that? Where do they go? And so as universities and institutions, I think we should be developing policies that manage that, whether it is holding a human ultimately accountable, or it is developing a set of parameters for which AI will be applied. And at the national level as well, we should be spending a lot more time teaching citizens what they should do if they think, for example, a bank has declined their loan application unfairly, or who they can go to, whether that's a Better Business Bureau or another government agency, whatever it might be. So that to me is the essential package. Like, what are the potential ethical issues that you might encounter in AI and how do you address them?
That's really interesting. So my next point is, I think, going back to what I said earlier, the anticipated release. So we're all excited, November 2022, March 2023 with, GPT 4.0. But now Google's coming back into the game, and Google really started all of this back with AlphaGo and all of these other really powerful, applications. Gemini is going to be released, a GPT 5.0 is going to be released, and with it, speculation and hype. And the danger with that speculation and hype is that we tend to oversell. And furthermore, here's the point that I would like your thoughts on. And something that I'm kind of concerned about is that the voices who are being heard, the most influential voices that are being heard, are usually people with prominent positions within the tech world. And increasingly, these prominent individuals are becoming investors in AI startups. So it really then begs the question of how objective are those opinions? What's the integrity of what's being shared? And for a general public who still sees this as a bit of a black box, how do we deal with that?
Yeah, this is the most difficult of all the questions. I think, look, if I had a headline for generative AI, it would be generative AI introduces new permutations of old problems that we haven't solved. and, and I think this is a case in point. The hype is considerable. Industry holds a lot of power over this dialogue. And at the moment, they are positioning education as incompetent. They're building on, granted, an existing conversation that's been used to push charter schools and, non-public education. But that voice is definitely there. The second thing about industry and data and AI is that it's from a developing country perspective, it's highly damaging. I think that this is something that's worth saying, and worth saying a lot. You've got a globally localized conglomerate of organizations that dominate the world, and they keep that, you've heard data referred to as the new oil. Pretty much just like the old oil, it's being extracted from vulnerable communities, commoditized by rich communities, and then sold back to the developing community. So that's something we haven't cracked yet, and it's just, I see it happening again, and even on an individual level. I mean, this is happening to each of us as well. Like, our data is being extracted, formed into products, and then sold back to us. And to be honest, it's probably not that different from me working on an assembly line to put together a car that I then go have to purchase at a much higher price. But it feels a lot more personal now because I'm not even getting a paycheck for it, So these are challenges that I think are worth raising with industry. And I think this is the main point that I would make about this, is that we all have to come together to discuss this, and to discuss our stated and hidden goals. Industry's got a profit motive. They don't often position themselves that way, but it's quite clear that that's what they've got. Society, we have our own motives, we have our own goals, and as NGOs or as academics or as other citizens, we need to put those on the table through governance and through other mechanisms. I think a good example of this, and I think it can work, and here's why. Because if you look at India and their AI for all policy, I think it's probably the best example of a citizen-centered AI policy that a country has come up with. It deals with equity of access, and also, on the flip side, equity of outcomes, so distribution of benefits of AI across the population. And that part is usually neglected. Usually it's about how do we give everybody access. So they came out with this policy. It was very cutting edge. Everyone was a little concerned, like, how's industry going to take this? Well, I'll tell you, they've invested heavily, actually, in India. Intel's there, Microsoft's there, Apple's there. They want the skills that can be developed from that, and they're willing to accommodate a certain amount of corporate social responsibility in that package. So I think that if we can find the balance point, we will be able to move forward in a more constructive fashion. But this is definitely something to watch, this investor and industry-driven narrative.
And I think it does get to, one of the questions that is on the chat. I think one of the first questions that we received that really begins to explore kind of like fundamentally, how do we deal with, recognizing data, data sources, who has access to that data, what does that data mean? There was a recent book, and I was trying to scroll to get the name of it that I just finished reading. And it really was a depressing book, because it really did talk about the extent to which, well documented, the extent to which data is highly biased. And in this particular case, the argument was from a gender standpoint. So from that perspective, and I think you've already alluded to this, I think this idea of data protection, when these algorithms are really scraping data, are massive. That leads me to my next question. The chapter that you and Wayne Holmes co-authored, Proceed with Caution: The Pitfalls and Potentials of AI in Education, which was a very interesting read, and full transparency was the reason why I was alerted to you, because I thought, this is a really interesting perspective. But that was published early 2023, which I assume it was written sometime 2022. From your perspective, what has changed?
So I think this actually speaks back to your hype question. And kind of the earlier point that there actually isn't that much that's new about generative AI. It's a set of applications of existing technologies that we've kind of been dealing with transitions, repeated transitions since the early 2000s in the data space. You know, the introduction of new hardwares, growing softwares, the introduction of social media platforms. I mean, all of these are revolutions that have happened. So I think that a lot of the things I would leave the same. It's kind of the latest in a series of revolutionary tools, you know. And I think that as such, the principles still apply. Ethical data principles that we've talked about. I personally would have talked a lot more about self-sovereign identity, which speaks to your data point, is like, who is the owner of data? And there's a growing fringe collective of us who believe that it's you. If you generate the data, it should belong to you. And the example I use for higher education is that, why do I have to go back to the University of Pennsylvania to get my degree? I paid for it, I earned it. Why doesn't it rest with me? And now, using technologies like blockchain, it's possible for that to happen. You can have these immutable stamped records that say, yes, I, the university, certify that Kelly Shiohira has in fact done this. And then I could carry it and spend it wherever I want. And this comes out really importantly in migrant conversations, refugee contexts, you know, a lot of the things we work with in the developing world. So I also think that generative AI is integrated into education similarly to other tools we've seen. There's teacher-facing, student-facing, and system-facing applications. So I think that that whole section where we discuss what that means would still stand. I would certainly include more examples that use generative AI. And I think that the issue of fraud, like on the one hand, it's new, but on the other hand, it's kind of cyclical, isn't it? Because when spell check was introduced, didn't we have this same conversation, you know, of like, should they use it? Should they not use it? When should they use it? And so I really do see generative AI tools as tools. And I do think that we could perhaps as a community provide some structured guidance on how and when those are applied. So I like to compare it to the calculator, actually, because it's quite simple. I mean, we've had calculators since the 1600s. We've had mechanical calculators for more than half of a century now. And we know how to integrate them into the learning environment in a productive way. The challenge that comes up, and another person I would say I would be careful about letting computer scientists drive the narrative, because they do have a tendency to say things like, we don't need to teach mathematics, we don't need to teach literacy because computers can do it now. And so as an educationalist or a development psychologist, this is, you know, of course, it's mind-blowing that someone would say that, but it's just because our educational backgrounds are so different. You know, what we recognize as educators is that the process has value. So we haven't given up teaching addition and subtraction because we know that that's a foundation for problem solving, resilience, you know, all of these things that we want to see students achieve. And we won't give up on teaching kids how to write essays, because that's an important piece of the process of learning to structure your thoughts and develop an individual voice. So really what we need are parameters. So if I had the chapter to write over, again, I would focus more on those parameters and what I think they are and should be, you know, what are the processes that we should protect as educators, and what are the ones that we can let go? You know, how do we integrate prompt engineering meaningfully?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, increasingly I'm reading and hearing the term cognitive atrophy, you know, that, you know, heavily relying on these tools sidesteps the process. And I think the process is important. Augmenting is one thing. If you have the ability, augmenting is one thing. But I think that there is a natural process. I mean, as I was saying earlier, when you write a paper, you go through that terrible, painful process of trying to get your ideas down. But there is something in the development of your own logic and your own thinking, your own aha moment that, you know, I've had it, you know, many times where I just kind of churn and churn and churn. And I take my dog for a walk, and all of a sudden it hits me. That process, I would hate to be lost by just entering an idea on a computer and then generating it. So that being said, speaking of aha moments, you've been doing this for quite some time. You've had some practical thoughts in terms of the application of this. What has been your aha moment in all of this?
Do you just want one?
Well, there's more than one. Provide more than one.
I probably have a list of about 10, to be honest. Look, I'm a big proponent of Blake's theory of contraries, which says that we grow in and through opposition. So it's definitely been true in my own career, and it's been true of my own kind of experience with the AI education community, to be honest. I get very excited when someone says, let me just push back on that a little bit, because I know I'm about to hear something that will make me think more deeply. I would like to say 3, I think. I'll give you 3 moments. One's very recent. So the first happened just a few weeks ago, and it's really kind of structured my thinking around the systems and structures conversation. What happened was I was having a conversation with a university colleague who works on an admissions council, and they were trying to decide whether or not they allow generative AI personal essays in their selection procedure. And so, the arguments were, on one side, it's kind of unoriginal, you're drawing from the collective. On the other hand, it was quite clear to this colleague that this was advantaging previously disadvantaged students. People who didn't have tutors, who didn't have college prep advisors, were going to ChatGPT and saying, like, how do I turn this into an admissions essay? And it was working out quite well. So the question that I asked was, well, what are your parameters for selection, for student collection? Like, what type of student do you want? And that's really structured, I think, my whole perspective on the context mattering, because if you're a small liberal arts college focused on creative writing, you probably don't want that type of essay to be submitted and accepted. On the other hand, if you're admitting students to an applied technology program, it might be completely appropriate that they've applied technology to a problem that you've presented them. So I do think, this has helped me to frame my thinking a bit more around the context. And I think the second aha moment was maybe earlier this year, reading through the entirety of essays and speeches given during Digital Learning Week 2022. This is when I started asking myself the question, what are the problems that we're actually solving with AI in education? Because the solutions that were presented and the problems that were presented were so diametrically opposed in so many cases. So I think this has really enabled me to think more deeply about that. And I think I've given some examples earlier in this talk. And the last question, it's not so much of an aha moment as just something that I'm still digesting, and I think I will continue to digest for a while. During the pandemic, I read Carl Frey's The Technology Trap: Capital, Labor, and Power in the Age of Automation. Now, I highly recommend this book to absolutely everyone. He argues that technological revolution will result in a concentration of capital and power at the top, and this kind of increasing economic disparity that we are experiencing now. And then further, that it's always some sort of social revolution that balances the scale. So extension of education to a greater proportion of the population, unionization. So at the moment, it feels to me like we're living through this continuous industrial revolution. Things are constantly changing. And while we have a lot of proposals about social measures, universal basic income, 4-day work weeks, free higher education, none of them have really panned out. So another question I've been asking myself since then is what will the configuration of work look like by the end of my career? And I think that's something that's worth pondering, not just because of increasing automation and AI, but just the complete social structures that we're experiencing right now.
Thanks, Kelly. That's fascinating. Before I forget, and this is for everyone online right now, I would like to share some reference and reading materials in all these webinars. So please come back probably on Monday, and there will be some references. Kelly, if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing with me that reference that you just alluded to. I would like to, and I think someone in the on chat would like the name. So maybe again we can include the references as part of the information that we're sharing on the webinar page. I would like to move to the questions in the remaining minutes that we have, and there are a number of really good questions. I'm going to pick one that I think is really important, so I'm going to try to read it here. So it says, Kelly, from your global perspective, what is your take on the fact that many AI systems and tech broadly are underpinned by Silicon Valley specific values, and in particular, that more optimization and computation can solve all issues?
That's also my favorite question in the chat, I have to be honest. So I do think it's highly problematic, and not because of the, just the reasons I've already cited, like the extraction relationship with, particularly I work in Africa, but it's not just Africa. I'm going to be quite honest, and I will say that this has been a disappointing part of the conversation for me, because there is a movement, the decolonization of education, that has kind of emerged over the last 3 to 4 years, I would say. It's kind of an extension of Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall and all of that. And the idea is actually not just AI, not just technology, but let's go way back to like the structures of education. And in fact, Bloom's taxonomy is a prime example of something that could be restructured, because I don't know if you've ever read, there's also a 1982 article by Bryce Heath, where she investigates the educational context of students, preschool students in different communities. And she doesn't explicitly say, the racial components, but they're quite clear in the article. And essentially what she concluded was that the hierarchy of knowledge may be completely different for students from lower socioeconomic strata. And it's definitely something I've witnessed myself as an American in Africa. Students come to school with pretty advanced reasoning capabilities from my perspective, but maybe unable to draw direct quotes from text, So it's just a completely different value system. And also that value system can be challenged by the introduction of technology. At the beginning, we saw that taxonomy of Bloom's and the reconfiguration. My own perspective is that we should throw Bloom's out the window at this point, because it was devised in the 1960s, back when the medium of instruction was paper and pencil. Teaching was largely didactic. Well, now we've moved towards project-based learning, experiential learning, the COAPS learning cycle. We're talking more about technology-based simulations, virtual reality, and all of these things mean that we can do things with education, and we can monitor development in new and exciting ways. And we need to rethink some of these. Does understand come before use? Well, not if we're talking about artificial intelligence, because it's quite easy to use and it's quite difficult to understand. So anyway, I guess those would be some thoughts. It is highly problematic. My disappointment, I'll just state it now, is that when I have seen these conversations take place on the international stage, primarily the people speaking on decolonization of education are not from colonized countries. They're from the UK, they're from Canada, the United States, Europe. And I really want, for once, the conversation about developing countries, and I'm aware of how ironic this is because you can hear my accent, but I would like the conversation to be driven more by those who are in the developing countries and actually have thought about this quite deeply on their own terms.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. And I really look forward to coming back to this important topic in May when we kind of convene our panel discussion. I would like to thank you. I think this has been a really fascinating conversation. I'd like to thank the participants. Please come back and check our site. We will have some references and reading materials that we would like to share broadly. And I'd like to pass things over to Karen to wrap things up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rod and Kelly. That was a wonderful discussion to kick off our webinar series today. As Rod mentioned, you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the webpage where you find the recording from today, along with some links to additional information on this topic. And as Rod mentioned at the start of our session today, this is just the first in a lifelong learning webinar series, and we invite you to join us on Friday, November 17th at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. At that time, Ray Schroeder, Senior Fellow at UPSIA and Professor Emeritus at the University of Illinois Springfield, will guide us through various AI tools, their capabilities, and how continuing education practitioners can effectively implement them. Thank you again to everyone for joining us today, and please enjoy the rest of your day.